няколко думи. Благодаря на господин Данчев, който така маркира няколко важни посоки, по които трябва да се работи в резултат от анализ и оценката, която е направила Световната банка. Аз искам да подчертая, че напоследък се забелязва изключително голям интерес от страна както на правителствата, така и на други международни организации, като ОСИР, като Световната банка, като ЮНЕСКО, към необходимостта от изграждане на системи за оценка на качеството на ученето с цел неговото подобряване и усъвършенстване. И въпреки, че през последните 20 години много държави по света се опитват или да надграждат съществуващи такива системи, или да започват от начало създаването на такива, малко са страните, които могат да се похвалят със съществуваща добра структура, методика и практика в оценката на качеството на ученето с оглед неговото подобряване и развитие. Особено това важи за страни с по-ниски доходи или такива, които по-късно са започнали да работят в тази посока. България, както вече чухме, също е направила своите така значими първи стъпки и опити в изграждането на такава система, но нещата тепърва предстоят да бъдат така разработвани с цел оптимизиране и създаване на наистина работеща ефективна система. Целта на нашия панел е да погледнем по-отблизо проблемите, с които се сблъскват държавите, които са по-напред от нас в създаването на такива системи за оценка. Какво е важното? На какви въпроси трябва да отговаря една такава система? Как събирането на данни за оценяване на постиженията на ученици и учители трябва да формира политиките на една държава по отношение на нейната образователна система. И с това давам думата на господин Сезар Гваделупе да направи своята основна презентация.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. 20 years ago, not many people in the world were convinced about the need to have assessment data. So what my task here is not like the task that I would have had 20 years ago about trying to preach, to persuade you that you need more data, better data, etc. Actually, it's, in some regard, it's quite the opposite. It's not about having more data, it's about basically understanding what is you want to have, why is that you are interested in having data, what is the data for, and what can you do with it, what you cannot do with it. So basically, after working on this and being responsible at UNESCO for the program on how to measure learning outcomes for a few years, what we have seen is that if 20 years ago we didn't have PISA, 20 years ago the IA studies like Teams and Peers were starting to become stable initiatives. And today we have more or less 150 countries in the world that run some sort of assessment, be it national assessment or be part of an international assessment. So the question for me is today, in these 15 minutes, is basically not to give you any answer, but basically to try to provide some support to frame the questions about assessment. How can we use assessment data to inform better decision making? And the first question is to inform better decision making, not to drive decision making. Decision making cannot be driven on the basis of data. Data fits into the process, fits into debates, fits into the way human beings make decisions. It's not the data, the actual here. The data can be an extremely important input for human beings to make decisions about what we want to have, what we're going to do with education. So for me the first point in the presentation is what for? Because if we don't make this, let's say, step backwards and say, what are we doing this for? Why are we participating in, let's say, PISA? What is what we want to get out of PISA? What's the point in doing this? What is the kind of interest that we want to address? What are the needs that we want to address by generating the information that a study like PISA generates? That's the question, because that question is important, because data, in the end of the day, is never collected. We talk in English about data collection, but data are not wild berries. They are not there to be collected. We produce data with concepts, with intentions, within an institutional setting, within an institutional framework, with policy intentions, with initiatives, with a direction that we provide as agents. So the question for me is that, to the extent that we're clear about the purpose, to the extent that we define properly why we participate in PISA, why we run an assessment of literacy skills at the end of primary or wherever we do it, to the extent that we're clear about the purpose of this, we first, people who work like me in the more technical part of this, design and information system, design how it works, I know what I want to produce. Because I know what are the needs that I need to try to provide an answer to, first. And second, you know what you can get out of it and what you cannot get out of this. How much can you say about the education system in Bulgaria based on a study like PISA? What are the things that you can say based on PISA evidence? And what are the things that you cannot say based on PISA evidence? There is no study that can be illuminated in every area that matters. So we need to be clear, otherwise we start torturing the data so that we make the data say something that the data cannot say, because actually the data never says anything. It's us, the individuals, the people, who can build stories on the basis of data, hopefully, sometimes on the basis of our imagination only. So the critical questions are, who's going to do what with the data? That's the first question that we need to understand. Data should be relevant to the agent's needs and the scope of direct action. Let me just give you an example. In a country like yours, head teachers have a lot of responsibilities in dealing with the school affairs. They have a lot of autonomy, they can make decisions about X, Y, and Z aspects. In a country like mine, in Peru, in South America, teachers can barely make decisions about the school. The school is very centralized, it's the political authority in the ministry, in the regional directors of education, whatever, where we make decisions. Principals basically make decisions about, okay, when should we paint the walls of the school? And that kind of very important decisions that are in the hands of the head principal, of the head teachers. So, I mean, I'm not criticizing that, I'm not saying this is great, I'm not saying anything. The question for me is, if I have to understand these two, I have to understand these two different settings to say what is the kind of data that they need. I mean, my head teachers in Peru, if I go with amazing information about the performance of the teachers, so what? Yeah, we look at my hands. What can I do with that? If I am not answering any relevant questions they might have, what's the point? For your head teachers, the questions are different, absolutely different. So whatever the national information system that you create, whatever the directions that you want to have for the information system to develop, you need to take into account that thing if that's what you're trying to do. Otherwise, is that you're not trying to do something. I mean, you are just producing information for national data, national policy making, and that's a completely different story. If I want to have information for policy making at national level, then the questions are all different questions. What are the main equity gaps in this country? That's not a question for the head teacher, necessarily. Because probably the head teacher in a school that serves a student with more or less the same socioeconomic background. So the disparities in terms of socioeconomic background are not necessarily the more important question, not necessarily, it might be, but not necessarily more important questions for the principal. But they are the critical questions for a minister, or for whoever makes decisions at the global level. Or what's the relationship between what the students learn and what teachers do, which is another question. conceptually, there must be a clear, almost kind of linear relationship between these things. Whatever the teachers do impacts on whatever the students learn. But the relationship is not so simple. It's mediated by many, many different things, and we need to understand that in order to provide better support for teachers, for instance. So that's the first part of this, and that means that there is not a single solution. This is the right study, this is the wrong study. No, that thing doesn't exist. I mean, obviously, there are better studies in technical terms. I mean, after this is clear, we can get into the technicalities and talk about how robust the sampling procedures are. Sure, we can discuss that. And so, but that's it, in a way, the easy part. That's the technical part. First, you need to understand what you're doing. And then, this study is not necessarily better than that. That depends on what are the questions I have. So what is the sort of evidence this study is going to produce, or this, whatever measurement is going to produce, and therefore how that evidence matches or do not match, or does match whatever I am asking. So the question for me is, especially for those involved in policy, especially for those involved in the discussion of in the political or academic debate, what's going on with education, is first to be clear about our questions. If that is not clear, we're in trouble. We might be in trouble. So these are one of the typical purposes of assessment systems. Systems can exist to provide certification of the skills of individuals, the students individually, for accountability of the schools to the teachers, for accountability of the system to the country as a whole, to inform national policy, to inform international policy, to inform program design and monitoring, to be an input for educational research, to inform school level decision making. And all these things are completely different. And some things might